Welcome to Winning the Audition, a special series from Contrabass Conversations featuring advice from leaders in the field about preparing and executing auditions successfully. This series is drawn from interviews conducted with dozens of bassists from orchestras like the Philadelphia Orchestra, Boston Symphony, Cleveland Orchestra, National Symphony, Chicago Symphony, and Houston Symphony, plus some of the major pedagogues in the field. This series provides actionable advice that you can use to take your auditioning to the next level. And while we're speaking with bassists for these episodes, this advice can certainly be applied to other instruments and disciplines as well. This series is divided into 4 episodes: preparing for audition success, practicing techniques for peak auditions, preparation routines that work, and sealing the deal. And I'd like to give a huge shout out to John Grillo, who is my co-host for several of these interviews. Now, before we dive in, let's take a look at the audition process in general and how it has changed over the past half century. Lawrence Hurst, the former bass professor at Indiana University, describes what the audition scene looked like early in his career.
I guess everybody understands that prior to about 1970, before the screens came up, that it was who you studied with that was everything. Because your teacher had the access to the conductors. And they could usually make a phone call and say to whoever, whether it was a Reiner or a Schulte or whoever it was at the time, I have a great student here. You're going to be in town next week with the orchestra. Would you have a minute to hear this kid? And that's the way it was done for years.
Hurst goes on to describe the adoption of the screen in auditions and how it transformed the way bass was being taught.
Of course, I think in the 60s and so forth, in the 70s, the ferment in the country just got pressed into the orchestra business, and it was way overdue because I know at Michigan there was an African-American kid there that was a great bass player, and he couldn't find work in this country. He ended up in Nova Scotia as principal there because this country just wouldn't even let him play an audition. So that was very, very necessary. That had to happen, and I think it happened at the end of the 60s and early 70s. But once that happened, the whole technique of teaching had to go with that because you couldn't just run kids through method books anymore. You had to get them ready to be competitive in the larger field of the excerpts. I mean, when I played for the chair in Dallas, I played an hour and 45 minutes with the conductor, and of course it wasn't. I played 2 Brahms symphonies. I played 3 Mozart symphonies. And I'm talking about first and last movement and so forth. We had the time to do that. Of course, nothing was really perfect, but the conductor could get a real insight and overview of what I could do as a musician because of the time element. Of course, they can't do that now. It would be impossible to run an audition like that now. And not to mention the fairness factor and all the rest.
During this period in the 60s and 70s, the audition scene morphed into what we currently have. And over the most recent few decades, we've seen a contraction in the availability of jobs, not only in the United States, but worldwide. Mark Ramirez, principal bassist of the Gulbenkian Orchestra in Lisbon, Portugal, speaks about this phenomenon, which began in the United States, but has spread throughout Europe as well.
The music world in Europe has changed tremendously. Contracts have changed tremendously. Before, you used to get a lifetime contract, and these days you get a 3-year, 5-year renewable contract. It's much of the same. It's the same thing that's happening in the States. I mean, I read a lot. What happened in Detroit, right. What happened in Philadelphia. There's a lot of changes that are happening in terms of job security in Europe. In terms of the old school, you win the big job and then you're set for life. That now is a dream. That's, I would say, is dead now, unfortunately.
Now that we've set the scene for our current employment reality, how do we acquire the skills to navigate this highly competitive process with the screen and all those modern details? What are people behind those screens looking for? Here's Rob Kassinger of the Chicago Symphony with some thoughts on what he's listening for.
The thing I always tell people about auditions is that if I'm going to sit down and listen to 100 people, which is sometimes that is how many you got to listen to, I say that you can break that number of people into 3 different groups, and the biggest group is in the middle. And there's probably 80 people at that audition who play really, really well. Not perfect, not like the greatest player in the world, but play all the stuff in a manner that's accurate to what's on the page. There's some musicality there, and that's like the big middle part. Then you've got maybe 10 people roughly at the low end of the spectrum who just unfortunately just shouldn't have bothered to show up. And there's variations on that theme, but generally there's you can kind of tell there's some people who just may be a little bit misguided about what they're capable of doing. And then you've got at the upper end, you've got maybe 5 to 10 people, sometimes less, who really have something special. And people always want to know, what is it that makes the special people the most special? And I really think it comes down to detail, attention to detail. There's just got to be, there has to be something more that you get when you're playing the recitative from Beethoven 9. The players who really make that excerpt work are the ones that are paying absolute attention to the details that are on the page and then making the most out of those details. But on top of all that, they've got the just ironclad rhythmic control. Their intonation is, it may not be flawless, but it's so close to being flawless that, you would just love to be sitting with this person, and that's really what it boils down to, rhythm, intonation, and this other category called musicality.
Attention to detail and that musical element, that musicality. How the heck do we develop that? And that's the real question, isn't it? And that's what we're going to cover in this series. Before we get going here, I'd love to let you know a little bit about our sponsor, DiscoverDoubleBass.com, which provides expert lessons and step-by-step courses. And it's run by Jeff Chalmers, who we've had on the podcast before. He was a guest on episode 172, along with Lauren Pierce, who's also a tutor on Jeff's site. Now, I dig this site. I think it's a valuable way to learn everything from the basics to really advanced techniques. And they've got free articles, they've got string reviews, they even have a show called Ask Jeff and Lauren, where they answer questions from the bass community. It's really good stuff. Jeff's doing tremendous work over there, and I highly recommend it. Be sure to check it out at discoverdoublebass.com. First, let's dive into preparation. What we do before we ever put bow to string can have a massive impact on how our auditions ultimately turn out. Andy Anderson of the Lyric Opera of Chicago has some techniques that work wonders to pave the path for success.
Every time I take an audition, I always make a booklet. I go to Kinko's, I have it bound with a clear front and a black back with a coil binding. No, spiral, not coil. I like it because the spiral turns better. It lays flat. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the first thing I do when I'm preparing an audition, usually, is make MIDI files or download MIDI files of everything on the list that's hard. And it might not be hard because it's fast. Sometimes it's just like Otello, where it's just really easy to play out of tune. The great thing is I don't think they get paid to do this. They just arrange full symphony scores for MIDI. So you have a file that has the entire score in it, not just the bass part. And you can put it on your computer and then open it using a program like Finale, and then you can tweak it to suit your needs. Like, for instance, on mine, I usually put a click track to it, the greatest thing is if it's a lick I want to repeat a lot and practice and woodshed, I'll put it at a tempo, whatever tempo I can play it cleanly, and then I'll just put little repeat signs around that and make a little repeat out of it, and it'll just keep playing it for hours on end. And each time I play it, I can quickly think, what do I want to do differently? And this is kind of a very athletic approach to learning something, because each time you're doing many repetitions, and each time you're bringing it a little closer to your perfect performance. And sometimes what I'll do with it is I'll overdo accents and sforzandos and things like this, and the dynamics I'll overdo, and it forces me. I always make sure I can hear the MIDI accompaniment going on. I can hear the solo. And that's the great thing about downloading it from the site is that usually it's the full score. You can hear, you aren't just listening to the bass part. You're actually listening to what you'd hear in a live recording. It sounds kind of dorky and mechanical, but the notes are there, and you can hear the melody going on around you. And it gives you an opportunity to practice it with your own little orchestra at whatever tempo you need, in whatever chunks you want. You can tell the conductor to keep repeating these 4 measures until I get it. And that's really nice to do. And then you can tell him, and can you gradually speed this up until it's at tempo? And sure enough, all you have to do is click the mouse a couple times and it happens. I have to very meticulously program my hands. And that's how I do it. I first program my computer and try to get the computer to play it as close to the way I have it in my head. This kind of stage makeup version of it, where all the louds are loud and all the softs are really soft, and then you have these pow and punches and accents, and then you try to get the computer to do this so that every time you listen to it, you get this kind of exaggerated version of the piece that will then, when you're nervous and your arms freeze up, will still come out.
What a great way to focus on the details. Sitting down in front of the computer and adding in all of those accents, articulations, dynamics. What a valuable way to internalize those details. And the objective feedback that you get from the computer playing along with it is just so valuable. Now, Andy also manipulates actual recordings in a similar fashion.
I realized when I started preparing auditions this way that I ran the risk of producing a mechanical, kind of cartoonish version of these excerpts, with all these exaggerated things and perfect time and, ridiculous sound, ba, 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 ba. That's not how it's supposed to sound. And so then what I also started to do is I create one set of files on the computer that's all my MIDI files for all these excerpts. And every audition I do this, and then after I get that done, and I've played through it a few times, then I start breathing life into it, and I cut up live recordings, Cleveland or San Francisco or some orchestra that's recorded a really nice, some recording of it I like, and I'll put it in iTunes, and then I'll listen to it a few times and mark where the time markings are around the excerpt. And usually I use a program now. When I was at Texas, I found this program. They had it on the computers there. And I think you've used it too, Amazing Slowdowner.
I have, yeah.
It's a fantastic program. It's like $25, less than the cost of a D string, I think. And it allows you to change the pitch and the rhythm and the tempo of a live recording independently. So, for instance, I put in all those Carry On, the
sure.
Berlin fill.
Right.
So I put in his recording, and sure enough, the A is really high. And then I put in like a Boston, and it's nice and low. It's right where it should be. And I'm thinking, it used to be that I would just have to retune for each one of these, if I wanted to play with the recording, which, I did used to do. But now what I do is I use this program, and I adjust the pitch to whatever I want. And if it's slightly faster than I can play it, like the last page of Beethoven 9, I'll slow it down a little bit so it's just fast enough that I can play it cleanly. And yet I'm still hearing all the chaos that goes on in a live recording, which is nice. And you get to the tempo changes. Sometimes I'll add a little click track using my computer's microphone to it. If, like, for instance, in a lot of Strauss tone poems, the tempo is so fluid that it's even hard to tap your finger to it to put in a click track. So sometimes I'll do that, and I'll make it more So I still get the flexibility and the organicness of a live recording that the MIDI files definitely don't have. They're very sterile and perfect and yet kind of boring. But the live recordings work out really well. If you find one you like and you just practice with that. I did that especially for the lyric audition because I had never played any opera, really. I mean, I hadn't. And so here I was preparing a list of material I had never worked on. And the only reason they wanted to hear me more than once is because I had done this with this material.
The amazing Slowdowner, the program that Andy's talking about, is now also available for mobile devices. And I've used that and also a similar program on my iPhone called AnyTune Pro Plus. These are amazing apps, and they let you do everything that Andy's talking about with recordings all on the mobile device. And we'll have links in the show notes to both of these programs. Now, however you decide to do it, playing along with recordings is incredibly valuable. And here's Lawrence Hurst talking about his experiences with this technique.
When you get preparing for an orchestra audition, you should play along with recordings. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about that, but it's a wonderful way to prepare because what it does is place you in the milieu, because most committees will tell instantly if somebody's played the piece or not. It becomes so obvious to the committees who's played what, but even behind the screen. I'll give you a great example. There was a competition at the ISB convention in Kalamazoo. Was that right? Kalamazoo? I think that's where it was. And I was on the panel, and they were doing the famous lick at the fourth movement of the 40th of Mozart. Mm-hmm. You know, when it goes, which is much faster than that, of course. And so I suggested to the panel, since for the listener to catch that, it's kind of like it hits you in the face, and the listener is disoriented. It's hard for the listener to pick that out of the air, both the tempo and the piece and the notes. So I suggested that we give them 2 bars ahead, which are simple bass beats, which go bum, 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 and then they start the lick. Well, that sets the tempo, it sets the kind of style, et cetera, et cetera. So we passed it. They agreed that was a good idea, so they passed it on to the students that were auditioning. And I'm not exaggerating. At least 35 to 40% of those people couldn't play those 2 or 4 bars ahead of that lick.
A great way to implement what Mr. Hurst is describing here is to cut up recordings like Andy was describing, but with about 4 bars of material prior to the beginning of the excerpt. That gives you enough material to recognize the piece when you're practicing along with it, and it helps to solidify those prior bars in your mind so they can be a mental cue in the audition. And something that Andy and I have also talked about when prepping for auditions is to take these excerpts, put them in a playlist, and then put that playlist on shuffle. That way you're getting a totally random reordering of the excerpts. Ian Hallis, the most recent audition winner for the bass section of the lyric opera, does a similar thing.
There's a hat draw element to it where you just throw things into a bag and you pull them out and you play them no matter if you want to see it or you don't want to see it, because you never know what's going to happen.
Developing the ability to mentally switch gears is so vital, and there are a lot of resources available to help get your mental game in order for an audition. Here's what has helped Brandon McLean, the recent audition winner for the Pittsburgh Symphony Associate Principal Bass position, with these mental aspects of auditioning.
I've read the Don Green books that I find really, really helpful, just in terms of centering and things like that. There's still some of that I do at auditions. I'm not so disciplined about it now, just because I've done it quite a bit, so I sort of know what the routine is without having to think about the routine. But really, that first time when I was able to go into an audition and feel that relaxing of my muscles right before I played, and really feeling like my energy wasn't all over the place, but I could really sort of compact that energy somewhere in my core, was really helpful.
Ira Gold of the National Symphony also talks about these books by Don Green. There are 3 of them, and they're wonderful. Audition Success, Performance Success, and Fight Your Fear and Win. And he talks about some other resources that he's found helpful in his own audition taking.
There's like a psychological aspect to performing that there's a lot of material written about it, and there's a lot of books that are out there. One of them in particular that a lot of people taking auditions have read is a book by Don Green. I think it's called Performance Success. I've read it, and a lot of people have read it, and it's really interesting. He kind of lays out, all the specifics about, what it means to have performance anxiety and why it exists and why we go through what we go through. And he kind of walks you through the whole process, and I think a lot of people have really enjoyed it. I'm sure you're familiar with that book. There's another book that's not directly about that, but it's called Flow. And if you just go to Google and type it in, I can't pronounce the last name of the gentleman, but his first name is spelled Mihaly. I think his last name is actually pronounced Csikszentmihalyi, but it doesn't look like that. But the book is amazing. It's basically about how we engage ourselves in certain activities that sort of take us away from our sort of normal consciousness, and we're able to really immerse ourselves in a certain activity. And he touches on artists, which include musicians, and athletes, and how, if a tennis player is like in the middle of a match, how they're just so, inside the game that they're in, that they're able to, focus so much on what they're doing. And he goes, from all different directions of what that's about, and how you can develop that kind of sense just in a day-to-day life. Even people who aren't musicians or athletes, how they can experience that type of flow. And it's really interesting, and it's one of the books I always recommend to people. If they ask me, what's one of your favorite books, that's usually the first one I mention. But yeah, definitely, we all get nervous. Just because I've had success in auditions doesn't mean that I haven't felt, my heart pounding or sweat or, feel my mouth drying up. I mean, I've experienced all that, but I definitely have always felt that, it doesn't matter what I'm experiencing at that moment. I'm still Ira. I'm still playing. I'm still who I am, and I can still go out there and really try to have the best experience I can.
Those mindset qualities that Ira's talking about end up being so critical in taking an audition. And Robin Kesselman, the Houston Symphony principal bass, talks about a mindset that he has adopted for auditioning that has served him well.
I never played a perfect round, and I've never to this day played a perfect round. I don't think they exist, and also kind of not necessarily the goal.
Yeah.
Like, I think this sounds like a bumper, like an inspirational bumper sticker, but I do genuinely not feel any different about my prepping and my performing of an audition versus a recital, except I don't get to choose the music, and they're very small parts of a whole, both like one voice of a whole and one small excerpt. But I think that is the most key aspect of audition preparation and performance, is that, and having sat on audition panels here in Houston too, on several, it's a musical expression, and it's a little strange environment, and it's weird, and getting comfortable with the screen, but it has to be a musical expression and an artistic endeavor. And I think most also just in the fact that, look, this is something that everybody's going to do for probably a time measured in years, and that sort of makes it potable, but also exciting and fun and rewarding, artistically rewarding. So I don't think it's not a scantron, it's like we work in a field where you don't get jobs with scantron tests or FAT tests or job interviews. I just think that even if you have to trick yourself a little bit, fool yourself a little bit, I think the more that one thinks of an audition like a recital, the better it's going to be for everybody involved.
Yeah. He also talks about how valuable it is just to have the right kind of goal in mind when you walk out on stage to play.
If you walk out and your whole goal is to play notes that are even and in tune, the second a note is a slightly different length than another note, you have officially nothing left to offer because your single goal has crumbled. But if your goal is to make lines and make shapes and be expressive, and then one of your notes is like a little shorter than the other ones, in a kind of strokey passage, it's okay. It's like you're still completely fulfilling your purpose.
So we go back now to the very first thing that we talked about in this episode, what Rob Kassinger was mentioning with what he's listening for behind the screen. This is Ira Gold again. Now he's served on audition committees for many years, and here's what Ira has to say about what he's listening for behind the screen.
It's interesting because when I went through that process of being on the other side, even if you try not to tell yourself, oh, I'm on the other side of this now. You know what I mean? Like, because when you go and take auditions, you're so used to the experience of, okay, I know I'm going to play for a few minutes and I know there's going to be a screen up and it's going to be this weird kind of situation where, like, there's no interaction and I have to talk to these pieces and they may or may not talk to me from the other side of the screen. Like, you know what the experience is like from going through it. But when you're on the other side, it really is different. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I'm a focused person, and if someone's playing music, I think that I experience it as a listener in a similar way that I experience it when I'm playing. But I think that your responsibility is different when you're on an audition committee, because your responsibility is to try to take whatever information you can from what you're hearing and turn it into some kind of judgment that's going to be valuable to the process. So if you feel that what you're hearing is really interesting from a technical standpoint or a musical standpoint or a stylistic standpoint or acoustically, then you have to follow that and try to use that as long as you can to sort of keep that person's playing in the game. I think that there is the idea that in an audition, it's sort of like some people come to auditions and say, I'm either looking to dismiss this person by what I'm hearing or looking to accept them. And I think that I try to see it as I want reasons to accept someone's playing when I hear it. So I'm trying to find things that I like as opposed to trying to find things I don't like. By default, there will be things I don't like. But what I'm trying to do is gather as much information about what I'm drawn to and what I think is interesting so that I can say, yeah, I want to hear this person again, or wow, they did some really interesting things there. That was a beautiful phrase, or whatever is coming to mind. And I think if you can't go to that point and you're like, well, I'm trying to like this, but there's intonation issues, or the sound isn't consistent, or the tempo isn't consistent, or it doesn't sound like they played this piece before, or they're not really filling the room. It seems like their dynamic range isn't really working in this hall. Whatever it is, like if you just keep feeling like you're trying to find reasons to want to hear them again, but you can't find them, then it means you probably shouldn't vote for that person.
So how do you develop those traits that make people want to hear you again? That's what we're going to cover in the next 3 episodes of this series. And I really hope you've enjoyed this first episode. I've been thinking about putting a series like this together for quite some time. This is the result of many hours of work going through the entire back catalog and listening and cataloging and thinking. And I just can't wait to get these other episodes out for you. And another shout out for our sponsor, DiscoverDoubleBass.com, for being willing to get on board with this new idea. I'm really excited about it. I hope you are too. Next episode, we'll be digging into practicing techniques for peak auditions. And this is all about various methods that people have used to take their playing up to that audition winning level. We'll follow that up with preparation routines that work, following along with several of the bass players I've talked to over the years and their path to winning their audition. We'll be hearing from Max Dimoff, Alex Hanna, Robin Kesselman, many others. And episode 4, Sealing the Deal. That's all about that extra something that people are looking for, that musical element, and how people have changed their mindset and changed their practicing to develop that. And after this audition series, I have dozens of other thematic series ideas. So stay tuned. I'm really excited to put these out for you. I hope you've enjoyed this first episode, and stay tuned for parts 2, 3, and 4 coming soon.